Hello, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come and discuss this important topic with us this afternoon. A bit later, we're going to have a discussion with Graham, CEO of Ivors Academy, and Michelle Lewis, songwriter and founder of the Songwriters of North America. Before, I thought I'd just do a bit of a setup of what the main topics of discussion are going to be as we get into the report. Now, a very strange thing happened to me last night, which is I logged on to Twitter around 9:30 to read some caustic remarks from my favorite political journalists, which I normally do around that time. And I saw I had a surprising number of notifications. And surprising for me is kind of anything above zero, because I basically don't post on Twitter. So I thought I'd see what it was all about. And what I saw was a post from the great Tom Robinson, now a DJ on Six Music, which is the BBC's alternative music station here in the UK, saying that he had just played a live session that I recorded, believe it or not, me, when I was an artist back in 2007, which was long before the idea of Blokur even came about. My first thought was, what on earth is he thinking? Because I was thinking this was recorded when I really didn't know what I was doing, before I was taking music seriously. Everything all the beats and the samples used in the live show were recorded on a £30 microphone and mixed on a home stereo. And I thought this is going to be pretty painful listening. But what I heard instead was actually something a bit different, which was a 20-something version of me that I barely recognized, full of ideas and creativity and excitement about making music. And it struck me that it was kind of a version that had not yet been tainted by the struggle that came later of navigating the music business, of trying to pay the bills as a songwriter and recording artist, and in my case, in the end, of giving up doing all of that to be able to afford to raise a family. And it reminded me why we do what we do at Blokur, which is that music creators are out there every day pouring all their blood, sweat, and human ingenuity into music that makes us dance, laugh, and cry, which generates billions of dollars for businesses that operate in and around music. And for all of that to continue, it's essential they receive a fair share of the value that they create. And so that's why we built Blokur, which is to make it which makes it easier for apps and platforms to use music, which is growing the overall pie and ensures that we properly identify who should be getting paid when music's used. And it's also why we produce this report, because when we hear a song on a streaming platform or in a video on social media, the songwriters, who are the people behind those words and melodies, are too often hidden from view. And these are the people responsible for the raw ingredient that our joy of music and our industry depends upon. And so the goal of this report is to shine a light on those people. So I mentioned we're going to have our discussion in a moment with Graham and Michelle. I'll just, though, show a couple of the highlights from the report, some of the insights from the report that we might discuss later on. So if I do this. All right. So I assume that unless you walked into this Google Meet by accident, that you have some idea what this report was all about. But what it is, it's a review of the top songs on digital platforms and the songwriters behind them, with the goal of shining a light on the people that wrote those songs. And if you were to download it from our website, which you can do, inside you'll find our chart of the top songwriters of last year. You'll find profiles on some songwriters you've heard of, some that you haven't heard of, and lots of information about the trends on different platforms, around genres, number of songwriters, all of these kinds of things. I wanted to just explain a bit the methodology behind the songwriter chart itself, which is kind of a key feature in this report. So what we did is we looked at all of the songs that feature in the top charts on digital platforms. So we look across Spotify, Amazon, Apple, YouTube, and we looked at how long and at what position these songs were in the chart. to come up with a list of songs that we're going to analyze for this report. So it's not based on a stream count, which is something that we have ideas and initiatives around to do in the first part of next year. But we think gives a good idea of the top songs. And what we did then is we looked at who the songwriters were for each of those songs and their specific share of the song. So if you wrote the whole song, then you score more highly than if you wrote half the song or 10% of the song or something like this. And we use a formula like this to come up with an overall score for each songwriter based on all of the songs that they've contributed, and we come up with our chart that way. So here's a flavor of the top songs that come up in our chart. Because it's based on the chart positions, if you've been in the chart longer, because you were released earlier in the year, then that's obviously a factor here. And if you saw our announcement earlier this week, then you might have seen that Olivia Rodrigo is the #1 songwriter on our chart. And that is based on the fact that in her biggest hits, Good For You, Driver's License, etc., she's a major songwriter alongside 2 or 3 other people, or 1 or 2 other people in those songs. So that's how she ends up being so high up the chart. Ed Sheeran, I think everyone recognizes. We hear all his music all of the time. And then we have Doja Cat. We have, this is way too small for me to read, so I'm going to have to zoom in a bit further. Yeah, so we have Lil Nas X, we have Bad Bunny, and we have the rest of the top 10 in there. And if you download the report, you'll be able to see in more detail these top writers, not just overall, but by chart. So some of the things that we found to be interesting in the report this year. So here's one. Compared to last time we did this report, which we did a year ago, we found that songwriters from the USA is still the dominant country, but actually there is overall a slight decline in the number of songwriters from the USA that are in this top 100 songwriter chart, and we see some other new countries starting to make an impact. We're also interested to see that in terms of genres, when we did this for the music of 2020, hip hop or rap was really the absolute dominant genre in the songs that we analysed, whereas this year actually pop has overtaken rap in the top genre. And it could be that that's one of the reasons why one of the stats that people often are interested in songwriting, which is the number of songwriters on average involved in a song, has actually declined. And that's interesting because for a long time we've been talking about a trend of more and more songwriters contributing to a song. And the question is, of course, whether this is going to be a reversal of the trend, or whether is it connected somehow to pop versus hip hop. It's still an enormous range of songwriters. Some have 1 songwriter, some have 13, as you can see here. So there's a big range still within the songs. One of the more disappointing stats, and one that we had highlighted in our press announcement, was that out of the 100 songwriters that get the highest score in this songwriter review, only 15 were women. That's even though 35% is not a large number compared to 100%, but over a third of the artists were women, but 15 were the songwriters. The song was written by women. So more for us to discuss in our conversation there about why that could be so low. And this is actually unchanged from the previous year. Here you can see, based on my headline, so I'm trying to emphasize this because I think that one of the things about songwriting, of course, is that some songwriters are also artists and performers, and some are not. And so sometimes if you're a songwriter that is not performing the track, it might be difficult for you to be seen and to make an impact and be then hired to write more great songs. So interested to shine a light on this, and a slight increase actually in each platform compared to the previous period are songwriters by profession who are not performing on the track. Another thing that we find interesting is that actually there's a big difference between the platforms when it comes to the type of music that's being listened to, and there's more of that in the report itself, but it's very striking in terms of the language that the lyrics are written in, because although English is by far the most popular language, on YouTube there's actually a huge variety of languages on that platform in particular, with things like Indian movie music really getting big audiences. So it's very interesting to see this this diversity associated, also connected to the writers that show up in the charts from different countries. We have a bunch of songs that just stick around for a very, very long time. So, for example, Dance Monkey produced our highest ranked songwriter last year, and this year that song is still contributing to the top chart, and some of these songs, these huge songs, are still appearing this year. So that's a whistle-stop tour through some of the topics that are covered in the Songwriters Review. And if you haven't got your copy already, make sure that you go to blokur.com and download your copy. All you've got to do is enter your email address and a few other bits of information. So just to discuss all of that, we are going to now hear from Graham Davies, CEO of the Ivors Academy, and Michelle Lewis, songwriter, composer, and CEO of Songwriters of North America, SONA. So can we have Graham and Michelle in the call, please?
Hello.
Hello. Thanks very much, both of you, for joining us. And Michelle, this is the first time we've met, so nice to meet you too. And I guess maybe, I wonder if you could just start us off by kind of maybe tell us a bit of a story about how you came to found your organization.
Absolutely. I'm a songwriter, composer. I'm actually at a production office for a cartoon that I created and I'm writing all the music for. So while they're writing music and stories, I'm here talking about the living of a songwriter. I mean, I am a case study in how it works. I've written, singles for Cher, Little Mix, Jessica Simpson, all the sort of like actressy pop stars from the Audies. Had a cut with Kelly Clarkson, just, lots of cuts, lots of singles. And I was able to kind of compare the sort of apples to apples of having a hit or a single in the early 2000s compared to 10 years later when I co-wrote a song called Wings for a girl group called Little Mix. And I was able to sort of go, this, they charted, they were both like songs that I had in the 2002 or 2003 compared to 2013, 14, which is when streaming was the main, mode of consumption. Both equal songs in terms of what they did success-wise. The money that I made from the 20 teens was a fraction of what I made, earlier. And of course, we all know why. But I didn't really at the time. And I was comparing notes with fellow songwriters. And we were all just kind of like, a lot of swearing, what the bleep. And we did a lot of investigating, and it turns out, particularly in the US, it's different in the UK, but in the US, songwriters' income is about 75% regulated by the US government. There's, antitrust regulations, there's copyright royalty tribunals that set rates. There's all these things that kind of cause the songwriter's income to be, sort of unnaturally suppressed. It's not a free market at all, except in that, I think the 25% is sync, is unregulated, but it's all a very like repressed market and streaming just sort of, it took advantage of all those regulations. So we decided the best use of our time, rather than, this is my friends and I who founded SONA, rather than like continue to try and chase more hits that weren't going to be worth it is to form a songwriter organization, a guild, basically, to advocate for sort of updating these regulations that were started in the early 1900s based on piano rolls. Like I think the word saloon is in the ASCAP consent decree. Like there's some really old-timey language, and no one, obviously, in the 1940s, when those consent decrees were created for ASCAP and BMI, were thinking about iPhones or streaming or anything, anything digital, obviously. So we really had a lot of work to do legislatively to update copyright law. And I mean, that's how we just we went from songwriters and composers to lobbyists in about a year.
I guess one of the things that has happened in the last year has been an increase, hasn't there, in the agreed streaming rate. I guess that's one of the things people have been campaigning for. So do you think that's going to be a big impact for songwriters, or is it a more structural, fundamental issue?
It's a more structural. I think we lost a lot. I think we were maybe a little too late to the fight. I see the list. And it's a great reminder of this used to be a job for my contemporaries, my peers, and I. That was sustainable. Like I would guess that in 2002, 2003, you would see a lot more non-performing songwriters in the top 50 than you do.
Right. Thank you. And Graham, so I guess there's lots of things we could think of that we could promote as kind of activists in music. Why songwriters? Why is songwriters the thing that you've chosen to get behind?
Personally, I've worked in publishing for the whole of my career. Whilst Michelle is an amazing songwriter, I'm not. So I'm working for songwriters, and I think it was really nice hearing your story, Phil, as a songwriter, and laying out the importance of this work and the work that Blokur are doing, and obviously same for Michelle. And the Ivors Academy has been around a bit longer, so we're over 70 years, and that's for songwriters, composers of all genres. And so we believe, just as Michelle was saying, that songwriters and composers, writers are important, and so everything that we're doing is to increase recognition of the work that writers do. I think it's a tough path to follow. I think probably always has been a tough path to follow, but it's getting increasingly so. So we really delighted to partner with Blokur on this report. We've actually been trying to get a songwriter chart off the ground for a couple of years, and as Phil said, we're hopeful with other colleagues to actually build on this songwriter report and get something even sort of better, hopefully, in terms of the granular information that we could make available in the new year. But what I love about it is that also this is a global report, and it's fantastic having Michelle on, from the US perspective. And I think sort of diving into the report, it's really important that we do see the music industry from a global perspective, because all songwriters are interacting in a global market, and the songs move, right? So I think for me, anything that highlights the work of songwriters, how that's changing, the trends, is a worthwhile activity.
Great, thank you. And Michelle mentioned, she's hypothesized that we might have had more writers who were not artists if we'd done this 25 years ago. I mean, do you think it's particularly important to shine a light on this group of songwriters? If so, what can we do for them? Because we don't see their name at the on the streaming platforms, listed right as the artist. We don't. If I listen to the song on TikTok, it doesn't say as written by what do you think?
Yeah, well, you're touching on a very live issue there. So the Ivors and Sona are working very closely with other organisations, and I think Blokur's a partner on this. It's an initiative called Credits Due. So I think this report, and hopefully this is the second year of this report, and we just want more of these reports. But obviously they are dependent on the underlying information. So who wrote the song? So if we're drawing attention here to like 100 writers that are being very successful, are there credits on the streaming services? Can you see what their credit against the song as you're listening to it? Can you then go and search and explore based on their contribution to a song? So obviously the answer is probably for the top 100 they are well registered and that information may be there, but unfortunately many recordings don't have that information. That information may be very late coming to the streaming platform, and obviously we want to do anything both to make sure that people can find and see who the songwriter is, but obviously if that information is delayed or missing, the songwriter isn't going to get paid. And obviously our organizations are all about songwriters getting paid. So I think it's a very good point. All of our initiatives really talk to who's the songwriter, aren't they great? How can we have more of that? And I think that, you know, just your point about actually the number of songwriters that were artists, and Michelle's point, that's why we need charts, right? Because we can then start to understand and more authoritatively answer Michelle's question. And what was the snapshot 10 years ago? We don't know, do we? I don't think we have that information. So that's why it's really important to have charts. There's loads of artist charts, right? Has been for, I think the OCC's at their anniversary this year, Phil, wasn't it? Can you remember? I can't remember the.
It's about, is it 60, 50 or 60?
It's a lot of years, right?
A lot of years, yeah, it is. Yeah, so Michelle, is it your sense that there might be fewer of this group around because just the business is harder to make money, or is it harder to get visibility, do you think, as just a songwriter that's what they do, just writing songs in the modern music business?
It was always hard, right? Like you were saying, like we always, you know, every young songwriter waited tables, did other things until they had their hit. The problem is now you have your hit and it's not enough. So, you know, whatever you do to sort of live to see the next day in the studio to get to write the next song, we used to have other, you know, whether it was an album track, ex-US track, you know, if you're a US writer, things that there were ways to there was enough money there to get you to be in the middle class and sort of exist in the middle class until you know, had another chance to get your hit, have a hit. Because it really is like you just have to keep showing up to bat, right? Like that's the
It's the you mentioned the album track, so this is not a well thought out theory of mine, but I'm just thinking about that. Do you think does it make an impact that basically it's song based? It's like single song based today. I mean, if you're Drake, well, we just saw Taylor Swift had all the top 10. So in no cases, they're all singles essentially in the top 10.
Right.
So if you write a song and it's a hit on an album, that one song will get listened to. If you wrote the rest of the album, the rest might not.
That was a real turning point for me too. Is I had a song on a album that in the early 20 teens that like everyone was writing for, like all the songwriters, you know, we all kind of like rush to the projects that need outside songwriters. We're sort of these, you know, the screenwriters of the music industry. And we sort of, you know, everyone knows when Kelly Clarkson is looking, or when Ariana Grande is co-writing, or what, you know, we all kind of know those things and we sort of rush to those projects. Dua Lipa is an example that's happening, you know, now that she co-writes, as you already pointed out. But there are fewer of those. There are fewer of those projects. And then, so even if you get an Ariana Grande album cut, and even if you're like, to my friend, like in my friend Ross Golan's case, where you write the song called Dangerous Woman that ends up being the title of the tour, but if it's not the first single, you don't make near, even though it informs the project so richly, you don't make a fraction of the money that, you know, whoever wrote the single will make. So yes, it's like that's the X that we're missing, is the album track. But it's still valuable.
And I think to the some of the statistics that you're pulling out in the report, around, you know, the number of co-writers, the number of artists who are also writers, and, you know, I suppose a question would be the extent to which those artists are fully
Right.
contributing to the writing rather than, you know,
Just putting their name on a copyright.
right. And, you know, because then it's one of their songs, and obviously that will benefit the songwriter. That's always been I suppose, you know, a constant in the process. But I think, for, you know, to your point about how much does a songwriter get from the activity of songwriting, so we've got, you know, they need to be that lead song. You know, being on the album isn't so good if it's a song that's got many co-writers on it, where that's diluted your share. And if the artist is automatically, you know, going to be taking a big share in order to cover or be part of the song, there are quite a few components there of. Oh, and the other thing is that I think that you pull out is the catalog piece. So obviously catalog is, you know, the evergreens, I think it would be called, you know, are, you know, new writers and to an extent living writers will be competing with the evergreen and the catalog. And I think we've got to ask about Bob Gaudio, number 11, and that.
Why is that? Why is he
Yeah.
there?
I'm glad you were asking me this after giving me a private warning you were going to be asking it in the prep. But it's because he wrote Beggin', covered by Manskin, who won the Eurovision.
Really? So Eurovision?
Yes, it was it was Eurovision winner rock band did this cover of Beggin'. Yeah, but that's been there was a cover of that also in the either late 90s or 2000s. It was number one chart, I think.
Absolutely.
That's come
Great
round.
song.
But if everyone looks at the chart, like, you know, everyone on this call looks at the chart, you see Bob Gaudio, and it's like, where's the song? That's so fascinating.
Yeah, and you see a lot of that. I mean, maybe bring a couple of themes together there. So one about the number of songwriters. I mean, is that something that you think has changed, Michelle, since you're starting out? And what does it mean for kind of the job of songwriting? It's not kind of Carole King and Jerry Goffin going to a room and writing on a piano all day and coming up with a song a day. How does it work? How do you get in the room?
It's really more like song management or song curating, you know, or idea curating. Like you sort of, Dr. Luke is a great example of someone who sort of morphed the sort of older version of guitars on the lap. Someone comes in with I call it a soup starter. Like someone comes in with a sort of inspiration for the song, or, you know, or maybe the artist that's the muse that sort of sparks the idea, and then you just write the song, you demo it, you pitch it. That doesn't really happen anymore. The way Luke kind of changed the formula is he came from DJing, and he's listening for hooks to keep the people on the dance floor. So he's basically curating. If you listen to the stuff that, you know, Luke really kind of had huge hits with in, you know, and almost how he sort of changed the sound of pop radio with Max Martin and a bunch of other people, but it's just hook, like instrumental hook, verse has a hook, obviously the chorus is a hook, a post hook, you know, all those things. It's really like more curated. It's like hook curation rather than songwriting, and you could see how that leads towards having more people involved.
It's a long time ago now, but I remember reading an article about this that kind of I found amazing about, I guess everyone does it now, but in the UK there was this, it's called Xenomania, I think they were called, and they did Girls Aloud, and these people, and I know that they basically would just have all these kids making loops in a building, and then the kids would come and pitch their loop, and they say, oh yeah, Dave's loop would go well with like share these lyrics, and then we'll do this with this and this and this, and then it's just like stitching it together.
Sounds a bit like AI.
A little bit, except you still have a human curating them. But
the contrast to that might be, you know, we had this big explosion in catalog acquisitions in the last year or so, and I was kind of thinking about some of the biggest ones, and this kind of Springsteen, Bob Dylan, Good. Simon and Garfunkel. Poor Simon. And is it a coincidence that these people wrote songs on their own, or is it just like it's easier to license? Or
I think it's a
what do you think?
combination. It is easier to license. They're definitely motivated to license them because they got to make that money back. But of course, I mean, if you listen to like Stevie Nicks is another example of someone who sold their catalog for a gabillion, and you hear, one of those, one of her songs, and the structure is the opposite of what I just talked about. It's something that no one would ever come up with a bunch of other collaborators in the room. It's clearly, Stevie's vision just kind of coming out. And I think it is like, or Kate Bush's, resurgence this past year. I think the need for art connection with an artist with a singular vision, and Olivia Rodrigo, right? That's two. It's her and Dan Nigro on most of the songs. Like those are from the heart, probably guitar on the lap situations. Like those don't sound like curated songs to me.
Yeah, I guess that's going to be, it's so difficult to tell when you're in the moment where the current songs are going to be the ones that stay with you for the rest of your lives. But it's going to be an interesting test for all of those curated songs.
I mean, I think that I suppose back to that sort of, the songwriters who've sold their catalogs and they are, superlative catalogs of songs. The report obviously talks to the TikTok phenomenon. So, I think again, for me, the reason for having these charts over a number of years is you start to kind of see, how those songs are coming forward with another life. And obviously, we can think of a number of sort of TikTok songs which have given rise to then, a younger generation exploring a catalog, because for them, that's the first time they've heard the song. But it's not needed the song / artist to go out and promote that. The social media has done that job. And so I think, for me, that's really fascinating. And also what I love about the chart is that YouTube profiling. And I think so much when we talk about charts, historically, it has been Anglo-American markets. Whereas I think, globally, because these are global platforms, and you see with the YouTube platform, it's much more diverse, isn't it? In terms of the, as you said, the languages being streamed as well. So I think for me, it's been really great to see. It's a much richer picture than you might see in, say, the Billboard or the UK sort of charts. Nothing wrong with those, because they are what they are, but it's just kind of the wider picture.
Yeah. Now, one of the things we have to talk about, it was one of the main kind of headlines, was this thing about the number of women that show up in our list of top songwriters, which was 15. So is that something that surprises you, or it just kind of, it doesn't surprise you, but it, you're not, what's the word, not angry, just disappointed, or what's the reaction to that?
Well, maybe if I jump in first. So I think I have to admit, I'm slightly surprised. But again, for me, it's the benefit of, more analysis to try and understand what's going on. So clearly, I'm not surprised from a historical perspective. And again, if these charts are informed by catalog, then you're going to get the historical lack of women's, profile in music will re-enter the current chart. I'm surprised. The bit I'm surprised about is from a Ivors Academy perspective, with our awards that we give, as well as, sort of tracking our membership and seeing some of the other, I suppose, stats in the industry, I think the current starting out and, starting and mid-career songwriters is much higher than 15%. Right. At least that's the perspective that we see. If we take our Rising Star Award, our entries, I think in every year, have been way above 50% in favor of women. So I think that I think the other thing that I'm aware of within, which is debated within the Ivors Academy, is actually the extent to which women are able to have a meaningful or even full share of the songwriting. So I think it's a question that is posed quite a few times as to whether women are, you know, pushed out from the bigger share that they should absolutely have and deserve, and, you know, by still a male, you know, oriented industry. And obviously there's misogyny as well in the music industry, unfortunately, which we're highlighting and you know, very keen to do something about. But I think they're my kind of, obviously very disappointed, and actively the Academy is working on lots of things that we want to do to try and address that. But Michelle, I don't know if you've got a different perspective to that.
No, you've made great points, Graham. That is absolutely what I was thinking too. Of course, it's a disappointment to see it, because we all suspect it. You know, we see. I know just anecdotally what it was like 20 years ago. I know there's a lot more women trying to get in the room to write now, but there might be parts where, you know, the whole women as producers, the lack of women as producers, because if songs, particularly in pop and more rhythmic formats, are part production, you know, if like even the writing is now seen as the producer gets 50% and the top liner gets 50%. Technically, I mean, traditionally top liners tend to be more female, right? Lyric and melody, vocalist, and then the music and the track is coming from men. Where I'm sure if we looked even deeper into who is producing and creating these tracks, there'd be like no women. So that's the place to really focus on, trying to get more, like if the women were co-writing with women fully to get the whole song done more often. And you know, that's where we're putting a lot of emphasis is like really trying to get women behind the board, you know, to so that there's more opportunity to have fully, you know, so you would have, you know, I see like Sarah Hudson is the only female non-performing songwriter on the list. But you have, you know, Dr. Luke, Max Martin, like, who are all producers. So we need more women in those roles.
So actually a question back to you, Phil, for next version of this. Do you have producer information? Because I think it'd be really interesting to see the lens of, you know, which songs had a female producer and whether there's a correlation with the.
Yeah, I've seen some stats which I think was sort of like 3% or something.
That's what I've heard.
You know, something like that. I guess it would be interesting to layer that over the writer, so you can sort of say this share went to someone who was the artist, this went to someone who was whatever top liner, this one went to someone who made some beats. That's funny because obviously drummers didn't used to, maybe they should all be complaining, but drummers didn't always used to get a share of the song for coming up with a great beat for the track back in the day. Is there anything in the fact that the proportion of the artist is higher, so it's 35% in terms of the tracks, the top 100 tracks? So is there anything in the idea that if you're a male artist, you get your name on it more often than if you're not?
Yes, I definitely think that's gender connected. I also think that's connected to the way streaming weights the sound recording over the copyright. So you'll have more, artists will be more incentivized or songwriters will be more incentivized to also be the artist.
Yeah, so I think you know, again, if we were able to see some of that overlay of the featured artist, so you get that correlation and start to see. But yeah, I think, you know, I think the points that Michelle's made and I have around, you know, where are the systemic issues, which there's definitely something going on there, right? Which is obviously we need more female songwriters, but there are female songwriters, but they're not featuring in this chart as they should. I think is a clear sort of indicator from our perspective. But I think, you know, obviously we need to get behind these things. And I think we've got some of the ideas around the solutions, not that they're easy. Getting more female producers, that's not an immediate, task.
Stephanie, who wrote most of the report and designed it as well, has written a blog on this topic, which you'll be able to read the next day or two. And one of the things she discusses is also what music gets recommended on platforms. So obviously everything we're listening to is recommended by an algorithm. We don't know. I assume there isn't just a rule that says only 25% women, but it's not transparent, so you don't know what could be driving it. I think with any algorithm based on behavior is also self-reinforcing, isn't it? So you end up reinforcing the.
Yeah, I think, obviously in the streaming debate, there's a bit of research going on, I think, with the government in the UK around, I suppose, transparency on the algorithm and that kind of recommendation process. But it would be true to say the industry, the more marketing push you have behind an act, the more likely it is to be moving up the playlists and featuring. So that sort of who gets signed, who gets represented, all of that kind of stuff, because we've been highlighting obviously there's biases throughout the process.
Yeah, actually. Okay, so if you are not on the stage and you're in the audience, this is your chance to start asking a question, because we're going to run out of time otherwise. So remember, go to the activities tab in the bottom right, click Q&A and ask your incisive question there. On a more sort of slightly more positive note with respect to diversity, we did have this thing about the languages, which you highlighted, Graham. So it seemed to have, we've had things, obviously we have the Latin boom, Bad Bunny and people like that on the main streaming services. We've had lots of Indian film music coming up on YouTube. Like, where do you think this is all going? Are we going to see increasing kind of globalization of music tastes, or is it going to be more like, by contrast, you have Amazon, it's just a lot of American country music is listened to on there. So where do you see it going?
So I'm not sure I know the answer, but I think, again, for me, it was really fascinating seeing the profiling by platform, and again, you've sort of featured on, where are the most of the subscribers for that platform living. So clearly there's a correlation between, if most of your audience is from a US demographic, then there's going to be a skew to less Indian film music, right? I mean, that you wouldn't expect that to see that. So the point about, I suppose, all of the platforms are global platforms and are looking to be fully global and get as many subscribers as possible. I think that's what I find actually really interesting, is where these demographics will go, and YouTube is different in terms of, I think it is more accessible. Obviously it has a big user generated kind of aspect to it. So I think for me, that's the one that's just really interesting in terms of the YouTube demographic. And obviously, India is as everyone's talking about, it's a huge market and, an exciting market, both for Indian music, but music from outside. So I'm not sure I've got the answer, to be honest, but again, it feels a bit like we can only start to think about these questions and answers by doing these reports.
Yeah. How do you feel about that, Michelle? You got a crystal ball for
same.
us?
No, I have no crystal ball at all, except that it was really exciting to see all these, nations popping up on the chart that I hadn't, the UK, Sweden, and the US they've sort of, and Canada have sort of dominated for a while. So to see Israel, to see Japan, to see India, that was amazing. And I actually think exciting, very encouraging in terms of that there is growth, that there is, we all think it's where's this even going to go? Is music dead? It's not. I mean, there's a lot of excitement around. I think there should be a lot of excitement around the global possibilities.
Yeah, well, as long as there's humans, they need to
Yeah.
express themselves, and songs are as good a way as I've come across for expressing what humans feel. So I don't think we're going to run out of song inspiration. We've got a question from Leia. She says, do you think the number of women involved in songs will increase next year? What can be changed in the industry to give female producers more space? One of the things that I think could be a sign of positive, if I was sort of watching the Glastonbury broadcast on TV back in the summer, and you had Olivia Rodrigo, you had Billie Eilish headlining. It does seem to be like this generation of young women that are really not just successful, but they're successful with their particular sound and their thing that they want to express. So that's what do you think? Are we going to see better news in the future, or what will it take to have better news?
That's a great question. My brother-in-law is he's a professor at University of Southern California, USC, at the Thornton School, which is the music school. And his classes, he teaches arranging, like pop arranging. So that's production, string arranging, things like that. His classes are 50-50 male, female. And so what happens after they graduate?
Mm-hmm.
Who gets hired and who is hiring? That is all what we can look at. I mean, I think it's so clear there is a space between school and work, that something is falling, something's not happening. Like, so there's a gap that's happening. But I think that what helps about this chart and all of that is, identifying the fights within the fight, and then like really running to them. And that is a place that we've identified as a real, there's a drop off, and we need to address it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that it's a system, and systems are hard for us to, or any one person to kind of feel like they have an overview of it. But we definitely have seen the same thing. Again, going back to the awards that we give, we can see the Rising Star, 50%, like all of the Rising Star nominees this year were women, all 5. Then you look at the winners of the more established categories, and it's a drop off. So what is happening there? Obviously, some of it is historic, but definitely not all of it is. And my only positive message would be, I think within the UK music industry, there's a very clear recognition of the issue generally. And so like the Academy has moved from, about 10% representation of women on the board to 70% in the last couple of years. We can see there in the UK, there's a parliamentary inquiry into misogyny in music, and there's some very, very awful things that are being shared there. So it's a very serious, some of this is very serious. It's not just, subtle. It's direct, abuse and harassment. Sorry to take this report into a dark place, but
it's real.
But when you talk about, how is that drop off happening? Clearly, for some people they'll be like, I don't want to. I want to get away from this, right? And so I'm encouraged that, I suppose, that some of the seriousness of some of these topics that it's being taken now, that will start to wash through. But to Leah's question, will it mean that next year's report is a higher percentage? Probably not. I would have thought, hopefully incrementally it's going to grow, but from an Ivors Academy perspective, and I know for Sona, we want to hear from people, and particularly women in music, as to what does need to change and how we can help.
And in the end, music is poorer if it doesn't get solved, because half the voices in the world are women, 15% of the songs. So that seems like a bit of a mismatch. We've got a question from Jada. She says, what advice do you have for songwriters trying to break through and get into rooms for writing within the industry?
I mean, that is always the question. And that is what I like about that question, is that has been a question since, for the 2 decades that I've been writing songs. That's always been the question, is how do you get in the room? And With my experience, I will say you go where the love is, right? Like if you find that you bring something, that you have something that you're getting feedback on that's really good, do more of that and work with the people that appreciate you for that, so that when you get asked, like you're so needed for that thing that you do, that you get invited into the room, as opposed, I mean, you can always like hustle and try and knock down doors and things like that. But I found it flows more easily if you have a specialty, a thing that you do that you are so good at that people need you in the room with them.
Yeah, is that harder in a world where you're brought in to be one of 5 with a framework of like, this is what the song needs to be like, and you kind of just got to go in there and be sort of like, are you more anonymous in the overall picture of the song if in that world, or is it still possible to get your niche going?
Yeah, I think that's, there is like, for my peer group, I would see us as like almost like the midwives for the songs, right? Like where we like understand who the muse is, who the closer is, and then you sort of kind of go, like, you, after years of writing, you kind of understand where the need is and you go to that need. If you're newer and you don't have that experience to sort of identify that, then you become the muse. You be the muse, be the closer, right. Be one of those like positions in the room that is that or maybe you're the person that's known for like getting the opportunities for the song. Maybe you bring the opportunity to the room or something like that. Just be needed.
Needed sounds good. This is an easy question, which if you can answer it will make us all millionaires. So what makes a good evergreen song, a song that stays in the charts for years and years?
Well, it's a flippant answer, but I'd say the song rather than the recording. But maybe that's a bit, forward of me to do so. But I am representing songwriters. But I say that because I think, just again seeing how, if it is an evergreen, it will get covered. I mean, we talked about the Gaudio one, in that that had been covered. That is in the chart as an evergreen, not because the original version has been re-released, and that can happen and awesome, but it's the fact that that's been covered at least twice and been a hit twice more, right? So I think performances are integral, very, very important, but it's the song. Michelle's going to tell you the formula for an evergreen. I will tell you the
formula for the evergreen. It is personal plus universal.
There you go.
Evergreen.
And elusive in description.
But you know what I do find is that's different because of YouTube, because of TikTok, is that marrying music and audio is more essential. Like that marriage, the attaching a soundtrack to a visual is what makes a song an evergreen, right? Like being able to use, running up that hill for something that came. In 2022, when it was written in 1986, I think, because it had this almost soundtrack of your life element to it, that made it, and I think that's more and more important as we write now. So being able to, again, be universal, as universal as possible, but without being generic.
Yeah, and an unscientific view from me, I'm not the expert, you two are, but is aren't so many of these like all-time great songs not following the standard formula that everyone, there's something a bit different. Like Running Up That Hill, she did have to have a massive synthesizer that no one else was using in her shed and go out there and produce it herself, and it's got great lyrics, and it's just one person's written. It's kind of, I don't know, and it sounds a bit kind of noisy and mad. So I think like it's unique as well. There's got to be some uniqueness for it to be a great song. Good. Okay. Well, thanks very much, everybody. I think we're just about out of time. So can I just say thanks very much to Graham and Michelle for joining us, and thank you for your questions. And that's it. Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.